But what would your rebuttal be to the arguments which say mass migration erodes like national identity? There's a loss of Western values. People don't share um, ideas or customs anymore, and it kind of erodes the social contract. Do you think those claims or those opinions are valid, or again, do you think it's just steeped in perhaps xenophobia?
Yeah, the idea of a national identity is interesting, isn't it? What's a national identity? Is it, you know, Britain has a history of, I'm not British, I'm American, so I can say this. Maybe I shouldn't say this. But anyway, it's the same thing for the US. We have a history of being global, a global power where, I mean, it's a very, in many ways, a shameful history that Britain has as being an imperial power. But at the same time, it also opened itself up to lots of interaction with the world. That's one element of colonialism that happens, right? So, so what are we trying to defend? The kind of imperial sense of bygone era of Britain, or are we trying to protect the idea of Britain as a global player, someone interacting in the global arena? Then they would think that migration would be good for that because it helps you to maintain that kind of interaction. So I think a lot of this, I mean, most of the idea of sort of protecting a society's national identity or national order of things is really xenophobia wrapped up, or in racism wrapped up in the idea of national unity, and it just excludes people. So,
Mm.
you know, to me, I think, national identity should be around concepts. I come from the US, so we talk about democracy, freedom, human rights, these kinds of things. Of course, the US has its own problems with trying to enact those kinds of things. But if you take those principles seriously, then they should be available to all. And that's what national identity should be about, is protecting those concepts, not protecting a certain group of people against another certain group of people.
Mm.
Um, and that's problematic. So if once it gets to be people against people, whether it's in the UK, in the US, wherever it is, that becomes problematic. But if we go back to the founding principles of the thing, then that's something that at least I feel I can get behind, and which shouldn't be exclusionary, and it shouldn't um, sort of be a reason not to kind of be open to migration.
Mm.
You know?
So would you think perhaps, because I think there's a sense, or the rhetoric of lack of integration is one which is quite widespread. Do you think perhaps the government needs to incorporate more integration policies, or do you think it's not necessary? What are integration policies? What does that even look like?
Well, that's a great question. What are integration policies? And again, it goes back to my question of what should integration be. So the EU defines integration actually as a two-way process. It's not just migrants adapting to the place they're coming to. It's the place they're coming to also adapting to the migrants, and it's a two-way process of communication. Like that's how EU policy defines it. So that's great. That's a nice start, actually. And I don't think that's well understood in all of the different member states, and not in the UK all that well. But it is a good start. Uh, I think probably a place to start with integration is ensuring that um, opportunity is available for everyone. So if you look, for instance, at what happened during the COVID pandemic, I was part of a group of researchers looking at the ways in which migrant communities were affected by a COVID pandemic and the lockdowns and furlough schemes and those kinds of things. And what we found, it's not very surprising, but we found that people who were already disadvantaged in housing, in education, in healthcare and employment just became further disadvantaged because the kinds of ways in which they supported themselves were not recognized by the official schemes. And so if that, I mean, it's not explicitly an integration scheme, but it is a way of was trying to make sure that there was a safety net for society.
Mm.
And what we found is that people were falling through the safety net because you had, for instance, taxi drivers who didn't have official papers to be working as taxi drivers, so they couldn't prove they were self-employed,
Mm.
and they were actually borrowing or renting their taxi from someone else who had the paper,
Mm.
or Uber drivers, or uh, Deliveroo staff who were exploited really badly, people who um, you know, found large families who had to keep 7, 8 kids at home and didn't have enough laptops for them. It just goes on and on, the numbers of ways in which people were disadvantaged. So, so to go back to your question, I mean, integration policy should be ensuring in the first instance that people are not falling through the cracks of or the holes in the basic safety net that the rest of society should have available to them, right? And then questions of, uh, to me, I think what integration should mean is that as an equal quality of opportunity, it doesn't matter so much what language they speak or what they wear or what religion they follow, as long as as they're able to access those benefits, those benefits of life and requirements of life.